The New Orleans Saints have added a new name to their offensive coordinator search, and my opinion is that that name needs to be removed from the list immediately. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, here on the Locked On Saints podcast, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media covering the New Orleans Saints, as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to go through and re-rank all of the candidates that have now been listed for the New Orleans Saints for their open offensive coordinator spot, including guys that have already taken jobs elsewhere, so you kind of know where they slot in for me as well. And of course, I'll give you the why behind all of it. We're also going to take a look at Dan Pitcher, somebody that is now no longer available, that was on that New Orleans Saints offensive coordinator search list. As he's staying in Cincinnati, we'll discuss how we kind of expected this all along and why it's not the worst thing in the world at all for the New Orleans Saints. And to kick us all off, we're going to start off with taking a look at a name that the New Orleans Saints added to their offensive coordinator list on Wednesday, and that should be taken off the list as soon as possible, in quarterback coach from the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Sullivan. We appreciate you very much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show. Today's episode of Locked On Saints, along with all of our crossover episodes, yes, there are still teams playing football right now, is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and enter the promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. So the New Orleans Saints have requested an interview with Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback coach Mike Sullivan. And the New Orleans Saints should not hire Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback coach Mike Sullivan. Let's discuss why. This is a guy that immediately goes to the bottom of the list for me when it comes to, I'm just giving away one of my rankings for you right off the bat here, immediately goes to the bottom of the list for me when it comes to potential offensive coordinator hires for the New Orleans Saints. Remember, this is a team that's looking to go into today's NFL. It's looking to update its offensive system, improve its offensive system, all of that. I do know and I do get it that the Pittsburgh Steelers, when they made their change from Matt Canada to Mike Sullivan, the offense got better. They went from averaging 16.1 points per game to, 16.6 points per game in the 10 games with Mike Canada to averaging 22.1 points per game with Mike Sullivan calling the shots there. 5-point-ish boost per game on average. That's nice, don't get me wrong, but even the Saints, who struggled throughout most of the season to put points on the board, ended up scoring 23 points per game. So with the fact that they had started off around 15.5 and then end around 23 point whatever, if you're looking at a 5-point boost as reasoning for positives around Mike Sullivan, then you might as well have just stuck with Pete Carmichael, and we know that would have been the wrong choice. And so I also think that going with a guy like Mike Sullivan would be the wrong choice at offensive coordinator as well. But it's not just about points per game and things like that. Let's look at some of the things that kind of just run through the history. Mike Sullivan's a quarterback coach, right? Mason Rudolph? Kenny Pickett? We haven't seen any development out of those guys. In fact, it's all less than inspiring when it comes to those guys. And so if the job over the course of the past bit has been to develop quarterbacks, and yes, he's worked with Eli Manning in the past, but he didn't develop Eli Manning. Eli Manning was Eli Manning well before he was an offensive coordinator with the New York Giants. And so I just struggle to kind of say, okay, well, if the calling card is supposed to be if the calling card can't be points per game, which I don't think it can be, because then that argument could be used in favor of keeping what you already had in the building. The quarterback development kind of has to be one of the next pieces that maybe you come to, the next bargaining chip if you're a Mike Sullivan, to say, here's why I deserve this job. Quarterback coach, look at all these quarterbacks I've developed. And that's not a list that's impressive at all. Then we look back at his previous offensive coordinator experience, because he has been an offensive coordinator and play caller in the NFL. It started off great for him in 2012 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, respectfully ranked when it came to those. 13th in scoring that year, 9th in total yardage. But then the year right after that, in 2013, with the same team, 30th and 32nd, literally bottom of the NFL when it came to total yardage, and the third worst team when it came to scoring points. Years later, he got another opportunity with the New York Giants, who not only had Eli Manning, but had a 1,300 yard receiving season from Odell Beckham Jr., 10 touchdown receptions from Odell Beckham Jr., and they finished 26th in scoring and number 25 in total yardage. So if the points per game can't be the calling card, can't be the bargaining chip, if the quarterback development can't be the bargaining chip, and if the offensive production can't be the bargaining chip, what exactly are we doing here? Right? Like, you have to wonder, what are you bringing to the table in that case? This is an offense for the New Orleans Saints that showed inconsistency consistently, that showed a lack of identity consistently, and that vastly needs to get into today's game. More motion, more play action, all these other things. Now, that's one thing that I will give the Pittsburgh Steelers offense credit, and trust me, there's not much to give credit when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers offense in 2023, even after they improved, is that they're 9th in the NFL when it came to Seth Walder of ESPN, when it came down to the motion report. So while the Saints were in the low 20s, at least the Pittsburgh Steelers were in the top 10 there. But it goes to show that just adding motion to an offense doesn't fix an offense. You have to have the why, you have to have the identity, you have to know what you're going for. And let's not pretend like the Pittsburgh Steelers didn't have the talent. You spent the first round pick on a quarterback, and I know that those first round quarterbacks don't always work out. In fact, I think you can pretty safely say that more times than not, they don't. But you also had a Najee Harris. You had a Deontay Johnson. You had a George Pickens. You had a Pat Freiermuth. Like, you've got good talent on that team and a solid offensive line, all these other pieces. And so do you put all that on the quarterback, or do you put that all on execution? That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? So the way that I look at it, Mike Sullivan would hardly be an upgrade over what the Saints just moved on from when it comes to Pete Carmichael. So it's just a first interview, and it could be an interview that gives them a little bit of insight into someone else or something like that. Like, there could be other reasons to hold that interview. We know sometimes things like that happen, like what I mentioned in yesterday's episode with not only interviewing Clint Kubiak, but also getting a look at Brian Griese. Even though Brian Griese only has 2 years of coaching experience in the NFL, he got to see up close and personal the growth of a Clint Kubiak. So you interview Brian Griese, and maybe you get a little bit more insight on the growth of a Clint Kubiak, who you're also interviewing, the passing game coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers. So maybe there's some connection somewhere that I just didn't find in my research when it came to Mike Sullivan. But in any case, if Mike Sullivan is the target, then the New Orleans Saints are going in the wrong direction, adding his name to the list. So he immediately falls down at the bottom. There are much better candidates that the New Orleans Saints are interested in, much better candidates that the Saints can be interested in as well. So I would not get super married to the idea of a Mike Sullivan-led offense if I were Saints fans. And I will be honest, if the Saints do hire Mike Sullivan as an offensive coordinator, it's the wrong choice until I'm proven otherwise. I mean, that's a guy that comes in and maybe doesn't pose any threat to the rest of your organization, but that can't be the reason that you hire somebody. You got to hire somebody with the intent of getting the best candidate possible. And I just can't see where Mike Sullivan is the best candidate possible. I really don't. And so we'll see which way the New Orleans Saints go. And if they were to go that way, I'll say, I hope it works out for them, but I certainly wouldn't get my hopes up, and I would be very, very critical of that decision. So we'll see. It's great that the Saints are and kudos to them for holding an expansive search of a bunch of different candidates that are at different points in their careers, coming from different systems, things like that. Maybe an interview like this gives you an idea of what it is that you don't want, so you kind of get a better idea of what you do want, whatever it might be. I just hope that this is not where the New Orleans Saints go when it comes to filling out that offensive coordinator spot. Now, one place that New Orleans Saints were interested in going was Dan Pitcher, the quarterback coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. They won't even get an opportunity to get a second interview in with him because he's staying in Cincinnati, which we kind of expected. So let's discuss why you really shouldn't have your heart broken over this one. If you are the New Orleans Saints, it's fine. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience, all the things that bring home the winning trophy are also the things that, well, keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to be able to maintain your vehicle, level it up, and of course, get that peak performance from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always be able to find exactly what it is that you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, each part is guaranteed to fit the first time, every time, or your money back. Because at eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive today at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed, only available to U.S. customers. All right, family. Dan Pitcher no longer on the board for the New Orleans Saints. The quarterback coach for the Cincinnati Bengals staying in Cincinnati as the offensive coordinator. We kind of expected this, and to be honest, it's not the worst thing in the world for the New Orleans Saints. Let's discuss why. Appreciate you very much for being an everydayer here on the show. Don't forget to go and check out the Locked On Sports Today YouTube page, the first ever national sports 24/7 sports media stream on YouTube. You can find it today over at YouTube, of course, by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today. All right, so look, quarterback coach Dan Pitcher for the Cincinnati Bengals. He was a guy that was in the sort of original group of 3 or so candidates that the Saints had announced that they were going to talk to. Him, Shane Waldron, who also took a job with the Chicago Bears. By the way, the only 2 offensive coordinators so far hired, even though there were 12 different offensive coordinator positions open, they're the only 2 that have been hired so far. So if you think the New Orleans Saints are falling behind, apparently the rest of the NFL is too. So that would kind of make them right on time, I guess. But now they've seen 2 candidates on their list get hired away. Shane Waldron was going to be a guy that, look, you're gonna take the Chicago Bears job because you're gonna get to work with Caleb Williams, number 1 overall selection. Like, it makes perfect sense. Dan Pitcher, he was set up for a second interview today with the New Orleans Saints on Thursday, and took the job to stay in Cincinnati. Not super surprising that he wouldn't at least take the second interview with New Orleans first. Probably took the Raiders interview, has a close personal relationship with Marvin Lewis over there. But ultimately, staying in Cincinnati was going to probably be the thing that he was going to do. And I'm not just saying that because he did it and the New Orleans Saints didn't hire him. I've got a show every single day over the course of the past few weeks. And ever since Dan Pitcher has been a part of the conversation, I had him ranked as the 3rd best candidate behind Zach Robinson as well as Shane Waldron. They've added new names since then. I'll tell you where his name ranks, which is not last when it comes to all the new names that have come in. But I've always said it feels from the moment on Monday that Brian Callahan was hired away from the Cincinnati Bengals as their offensive coordinator to the Tennessee Titans as their head coach, that Dan Pitcher was probably going to stay in Cincinnati, and that's exactly what happened. And from the very beginning, when it came to Dan Pitcher, one of the things that I said was that he wouldn't be the ideal hire. He wouldn't be a bad one, but he wouldn't be the ideal hire for the New Orleans Saints. Let's discuss a little bit as to why that's the case. Let's look at the Bengals offense, whether it's Joe Burrow or Jake Browning. These numbers are pretty consistent. With Joe Burrow, they only ran play action on 20.6% of their plays. That's not bad at all, but it's not really like the 22% that you would see from the Kyle Shanahan offense. And listen, I know what you're thinking, 22 versus 20%, that's not that big of a deal. It is when you drop back 600 times in a season. 2% is quite a bit different, right? And that changes the way that you look at the game in the NFL. Jake Browning, 20.4%. Again, play action, pretty good. But here's where my biggest concern is with the Cincinnati Bengals offense is that they have been a pure drop back offense to the point where they don't really even run a lot of motion. And this was a big complaint about the New Orleans Saints all season. The Saints ran motion on 14.3% of their plays, again in the high 20s there, but not far ahead of them were the Cincinnati Bengals at 17.1%. That's not enough of a boost. That would have effectively been the same system. You might have gotten more play action out of Derek Carr because he only ran 14.8% of his dropbacks under play action, which is laughable, absolutely laughable if you're the New Orleans Saints. And so you would have gotten a boost there, but you wouldn't have really gotten the motion in. You wouldn't have really gotten the innovation in that comes with the NFL in today's game. And then you look at and compare that to some of the other candidates and the systems that they're coming from. Let's look at like a Zach Robinson who's coming from Los Angeles. With Matthew Stafford, they ran play action 20.5% of the time, so around the same as Cincinnati. Like I said, good, not great, but good. But then motion, 44.1%, number 2 in the NFL, behind only the Miami Dolphins, who ran it over 60% of the time. Let's look at the 49ers, 22.2% play action, like I mentioned earlier. 37.7% of their snaps included motion. That's third in the NFL. Those are the numbers that you're trying to get to. That's what you're trying to get to if you're the New Orleans Saints. That's what you're trying to get to if you're trying to upgrade your offense in today's NFL. So subscribing to effectively, or let me say it this way, subscribing to hiring or appointing an offensive coordinator that was the quarterback coach for a system that was effectively running something similar to what you were already running, you're not growing. You're not changing. You're not improving in that case. I love that there was the Sean McVay connection there. Dan Pitcher. Sorry, there's my theater coming out. Harold Pinter reference. Anybody? No, just me. Okay. There's going to be one person who knows who Harold Pinter is and is going to write to me and say, I got you and I appreciate you in advance. But Dan Pitcher getting the training under Zach Taylor being a guy that was a Sean McVay guy. Like there's a lot there that you look at and you go, okay, well, Dan Pitcher, gets away from Zach Taylor, goes to a different system, right? Zach Taylor was a play caller, not Dan Pitcher. So how do things change, evolve? Maybe he wanted more play action. Maybe he wanted more motion, things like that. All that's fine. All that's fine and dandy. So like there are those things that you could project, but I'd rather go with the things that are a little bit easier to project. So like I said, if you're thinking about like the possibility for the improvement on those numbers and getting those things at a greater consistency than what you were getting them from Pete Carmichael in 2023, then there's a safe bet that you were probably going to get better. But are you going to optimize? Are you going to get to where you should be in one of today's NFL offenses? The answer to that is probably no. So that keeps guys like Zach Robinson, Clint Kubiak, Gerard Johnson, that keeps guys like that up at the top of the list over guys like a Dan Pitcher. And we kind of knew that this was going to happen. Like, especially if you're a Locked On Saints insider, we've been talking about this all week. Hey, like this is probably going to happen kind of stuff, right? So like, this isn't super surprising at all. And it's okay. This is not a, knockout shot for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to their offensive coordinator search. They're not drastically behind on their offensive coordinator search. I'd love for them to have an OC in place before the Senior Bowl. But ideally, you at least have one in place during the Senior Bowl or at least before the Combine, which is effectively guaranteed. Like you're going to have your entire staff ready by the time that the Combine rolls around. Wide receiver coach, running backs coach, all that stuff that the Saints also have to fill out. But they're not far behind. Only 2 teams across the entire NFL so far with 12 potential openings, including the Chicago Bears and the Cincinnati Bengals when that job opened up. Only 2 of them have filled their offensive coordinator spots. And some of them that are open with offensive coordinator spots still don't even have head coaches, and you're not going to hire an OC before you hire a head coach, right? And maybe the biggest domino at head coach has already fallen into place. That was Jim Harbaugh landing with the Los Angeles Chargers. Now a top offensive coordinator candidate will probably go there. A Zach Robinson, a Clint Kubiak, somebody else will probably end up landing there, or somebody that Harbaugh brings up from college that he really likes or whatever that might be. And then once that job is filled, then because that's the best job that's available, right? It's the best quarterback that's available, all that other stuff. Then you'll start to see all the other stuff fall into place. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the Chargers land their OC before the Saints do. That's just the pecking order of the NFL. What's the best opportunity? And the best opportunity is going to fill in. But the Saints are by no means behind at this point. Can they get behind? 100%. But that's not going to be because they didn't do their due diligence, get their interviews in. It would be because their job wasn't appealing enough. And so what are they doing to make their job appealing? That's going to be the thing that makes the biggest difference down the road. All right, coming up next, let's rank all of the candidates that the New Orleans Saints have had so far. There have been 8 named candidates, including 1 in-house candidate. I'm going to give you my rankings, and it's obvious where this starts. Guys like Zach Robinson, guys like Clint Kubiak. Let's talk about that and why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Two massive matchups coming up on Sunday. Of course, ready to stamp their way to the Super Bowl. So we're taking a look at the odds here for Kansas City Chiefs, Baltimore Ravens. Baltimore Ravens at home, 3.5-point favorites. Detroit traveling to the Bay to take on the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers, a touchdown favorite, 7 points. So maybe you like those. You like one of the favorites. Maybe you like one of the underdogs there. Well, right now, if you're a new customer, it's the perfect time to get involved over at FanDuel. You can take the risk of the Detroit Lions at -7. And if you put down a $5 bet, no matter what, as a new customer, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose, that you can then take away and then use however you want, including parlays in the Parlay Hub, finding the best bets over in the Explore tab, all that. You can find it all at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Visit today to get started. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I've got 8 candidates for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to their offensive coordinator interview list so far, and I'm going to rank them all 1B through 7. Technically is the way that we're going to end up doing this here. Don't forget, we are your team every day. We'll be back with a fresh episode for you tomorrow, keeping you up to date on this and much more going on around the New Orleans Saints. But the offensive coordinator search is keenly in focus right now here on the show, as we've been breaking it down over the course of the last, 3 weeks now? Like, just having a blast here on the show. Appreciate it. All right, so here's my ranking. I'm going to go 1 through 7, which technically is 1A, 1B, and then we'll kind of highlight this, and then we'll kind of break all this down. I am going to include Shane Waldron and Dan Pitcher in here because I want to emphasize where I had them ranked so that you kind of know why I'm not super down on the Saints losing out on both of them. So here's the way that I look at it. My rankings for the candidates so far. 1A, Zach Robinson, the passing game coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams, quarterback coach as well. And then 1B, Clint Kubiak, the passing game coordinator. I keep doing that, passing game coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. So that's my 1A, 1B, Kubiak and Robinson. Number 2, Gerard Johnson, the quarterback coach for the Houston Texans. Number 3, the in-house hire of Ronald Curry. Number 4 is where I had Shane Waldron. I could honestly flip-flop Shane Waldron and Ronald Curry and be perfectly comfortable with that. Number 5, Dan Pitcher. Now remember, Shane Waldron's already taken the job over in Chicago. Number 5 is where I had Dan Pitcher ranked amongst these candidates. He's staying in Cincinnati. Number 6, quarterback coach for the San Francisco 49ers, Brian Griese. And then number 7, the quarterback coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers in Mike Sullivan. So let's break down why I have these candidates ranked this way. I've got Zach Robinson at 1A, Clint Kubiak at 1B. Believe it or not, the A and the B are intentional. So Robinson a little bit over Kubiak. So could I called him 1 and called Kubiak 2? Yes, but that's not interesting. Leave me alone, number police. So the way that I look at it is that for me, Zach Robinson is number 1 because we haven't seen Zach Robinson fail somewhere else in the way that we saw Clint Kubiak struggle when it came to the 2021 season as the offensive coordinator with the Minnesota Vikings. He's got things to prove that are things that he has to prove he's gotten better at, while Zach Robinson just has to prove I can do it, right? So for me, you're going from a negative to a positive. When it comes to Kubiak, you're going from neutral and unknown to positive. With Zach Robinson, the threshold's just a little bit different, right? So I've got Zach Robinson up on the top of there. Why Zach Robinson? Because Los Angeles Rams run around the same amount of play action as pretty much around the rest of the NFL, with some peaks and valleys there. New Orleans Saints currently in a valley when it comes to those rankings. And of course, the motion, the Los Angeles Rams having worked immediately with Sean McVay right now. Los Angeles Rams number 2 in the NFL when it comes to motion usage, 44.1%. And I love being able to draw directly from that Sean McVay tree. I saw somebody ask a very good question the other day when talking about why, at what point do the trees bottom out, right? At what point does Sean McVay's tree no longer bear fruit? At what point does Kyle Shanahan's tree no longer bear fruit? It's a valid question. But the thing about it, and as Travis Rogers spoke with us about last Friday, in an episode where we were talking about why hiring from the Sean McVay tree is a good idea. It's because from the Sean McVay tree, you're not just getting guys that are good system-wise. Sean McVay is an excellent evaluator of talent. You can see it with the guys that he has continuously invested in and the guys that he's worked with and the guys that have come out of that system. So it's not just about what they can bring. McVay is somebody that you trust as an evaluator of coaching talent. So steal his ideas. That's what the NFL is all about. So I'm all about that with Zach Robinson. I have a very, very good feeling, just like I had with Mike McDaniel, just like I had with Bobby Slowick, that passing game coordinator role is a good enough one to pull from the McVay, from the Shanahan systems and find a good offensive coordinator. I think Robinson would be that pretty quickly for New Orleans. Maybe a couple of games to get things right, but all about where that would head. The reason why I have Kubiak at 1B is because he's got to prove he's better than he was in 2021 with the Minnesota Vikings. Produced good numbers with Kirk Cousins and with Justin Jefferson, but a lot of the play calling stuff was like, a handful of plays to two handfuls of plays and then just trying to focus on sequencing them, kind of using his dad's playbook of Gary Kubiak. So what I said in yesterday's episode about Clint Kubiak was that if he shows up with his dad's playbook, send him home, right? Take his name off the list, send him home. If he shows up with a much more expansive Kyle Shanahan playbook, then all right, you can sit at the table. Let's have a conversation. So I just think that Kubiak has something to prove. But if he shows up with the Shanahan influence instead of the Daddy Coobs influence, then I'm all about what it is that a Clint Kubiak would end up bringing with knowledge coming from both. Because at one time, the Gary Kubiak simplistic, not simple approach, was one that worked in the NFL. And so if you're able to blend a little bit of that with a more highly complex system of a Kyle Shanahan, who has more, variations on the route tree than Gary Kubiak has plays, then I think you feel really good about what the marriage of that can be. Understanding when to simplify and understanding when to lean into the complexity, because sometimes game situations force you to make that choice. All right. So that's the bulk of it. Gerard Johnson's at number 2 for me because he's got some of that McVay system. He's got some of that Shanahan influence. He's got some of the Frank Reich influence as well. I like the fact that he's from 3 of the 5 active coaching trees in the NFL as Sean Payton's grows a little bit, right? Dan Campbell, Doug Peterson, all that. But really you've got 5 or 6 strong coaching trees. And the fact that he's got experience with 3 of them, fantastic. And he's probably like a Kwesi Adofo-Mensah guy, and that's another guy that the general manager over in Minnesota who's really good at evaluating talent. Number 3, I've got Ronald Curry. Yes, I know that going from Pete Carmichael to Ronald Curry is still going from one guy to the other guy that's in the same system, but you have to imagine that Ronald Curry is going to bring fresh ideas and understands the value of moving forward in today's offense and looking at innovating over on the offensive side of the football. I have a hard time believing that Ronald Curry would come in and just step into that role and then use the exact same playbook that the New Orleans Saints have been using. I imagine he would have his variations on a theme and all those other things. Would it be a little disappointing? Maybe. Could the New Orleans Saints, and maybe the thing that would be most disappointing about it is that the Saints probably should have done that during the 2023 season, as we talked about here on the show many, many times. But hey, look, if that's the route that you feel like you go, that's probably the route that you have to go. So that feels like one to where if all the top guys are off the board, you've got a good fail-safe that's built into your system. But not to disrespect Ronald Curry, who deserves a ton of praise, who deserves the opportunity to be an offensive coordinator in the NFL, and who has continuously been highly respected, not only within the organization of the New Orleans Saints, but outside of the building as well. Ronald Curry is a good candidate. Then I had Shane Waldron. Then I had Dan Pitcher. We've discussed those guys already. And then at number 6, I've got Brian Griese. Brian Griese, like 10 years of NFL quarterback experience. Awesome. I think that does more than maybe we give it credit for, but has only been a coach in the NFL for 2 seasons as a quarterback coach of the San Francisco 49ers, 2022, 2023. I think that if Clint Kubiak gets hired away and then Brian Griese steps up into the passing game coordinator spot, 1 year of Brian Griese as a passing game coordinator, boom, he's got all the knowledge that he needs to be ready to step into an offensive coordinator role. I do think that that's true. I just don't think that he's ready just yet. I think hiring a Brian Griese in 2024 as your offensive coordinator is akin to what you saw from Clint Kubiak in 2021 as an offensive coordinator. Not experienced enough just yet. Although the 10 years of quarterback experience and actually doing it out on the field does count for something, I just want to get the design side of it down a little bit more for him. So I'd like to see him in that passing game coordinator spot first. And then finally, number 7, Mike Sullivan, which I spent the entire first segment on, so I'm not going to bore you with that again. but he's at the bottom of the list. If the Saints hire him, I hope it works out, but I wouldn't have much faith in that one. So Zach Robinson, Gary Kubiak, number 1, number 2, or number 1A, number 1B, as I prefer to call it. Not Gary Kubiak, sorry, Clint Kubiak. Gerard Johnson at number 2, Ronald Curry at number 3. We'll remove Shane Waldron and Dan Pitcher from this point forward. So that would mean Brian Griese at number 4, and then Mike Sullivan at number 5. So that's my rankings so far. Let me know your rankings and how you feel about this group that the New Orleans Saints have currently gone in to interview. I don't think we're at the end of this list yet, but I do think the New Orleans Saints might be narrowing their decision here pretty soon. So we'll see. We'll see exactly how quickly they get this done. All right, y'all. I appreciate you as always making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On Pelicans as well as Locked On LSU. Locked On LSU right now, a lot of fun. The Tigers, they've got their offensive coordinator. They're hiring folks from Tulane. They've got a whole bunch of great stuff going on over there. So check it out, all of it with Caroline Fenton. Thank you very, very much, as always, for making us a part of your day and a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.